Welcome to Consulting Mastery, where we help B2B consultants master the business of consulting. I'm Carrie.
And I'm Ahmed. Join us as we explore the art of delivering outstanding client value, earning a higher income, and thriving in today's marketplace. Identity is the ultimate bottleneck. Prove me wrong.
I would not even attempt to prove you wrong on that count. I could not agree anymore, quite frankly.
That's no fun.
Episode over.
We're just going to agree with each other now?
Yeah.
The ones where we fight, they're more fun.
They are more fun. I'm sure we'll get there.
So here's what I mean. We have an interesting vantage point here because we've seen so many consultants come through 90-day pipeline. We also work very closely with a lot of the graduates in our mastermind program. And so we've been able to see people not just from when they first start working with us, but 3 months later, 6 months later, 9 months later, 12 months later, 24 months later, sometimes years later. And we've seen kind of the evolution of the transformation that takes place for a consultant. And I think it's fair to say that the thing that's really holding people back from making more and faster forward progress is themselves. Ultimately, it's not the market, it's not strategy, it's not tactics, it's not the LinkedIn algorithm, it's not any of these silly things, right? It's them, the people themselves, and more specifically, I mean, their self-image, their self-concept, their identity, how they see themselves. Because some things are really hard to do if they're not in alignment with your self-image. And those same things are very easy to do if they are in alignment with your self-image. For example, going from corporate executive to solo consultant is a leap. And there are things that you have to do. There are things that you have to be able to engage with that are foreign to the identity of the corporate executive, but necessary to the identity of the solo consultant. And there's a learning curve there. And to the extent that you get comfortable in the shoes of being a solo consultant, you'll become more comfortable doing the things required to get the results you want to get. The same is true for going from a solo consultant who, does all the work and engages with the clients and is the expert in the room and clients love you, blah, 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 to them building a team and delegating some of that work and growing the team and grooming the team and teaching clients how to work with the team. That's hard to do if you're stuck in the identity and the self-image of the solo consultant. You've got to become a team leader. You've got to become a CEO. You've got to become a managing partner, whatever it may be, right? And so I think it's pretty clear at this stage that the thing that's really holding people back is their ability to acquire a new identity at a certain speed.
And there are, I think, two reasons for that happening. One is the unwillingness, maybe, or fear, or, whatever the language is you want to use to step into that new identity. And that could be a purposeful unwillingness, or it could be something that's, much more under the surface. There's also, I believe, the issue where they just don't know what that new identity looks like. And so if the goal, and I think the goal for most people is, right, to be able to move from identity I was in yesterday to identity I need to be in for the foreseeable future, which would you say is the first one to try to resolve?
Well, I think a comment on the fear, first of all. The fear is real. I think that's the thing, right? Because it's like if you wore the same outfit for your entire life. Like today I'm wearing a blue kind of button-down shirt and some khakis. If that's all I ever wore every single day from, the moment I came into existence until now, and then all of a sudden, you told me to put on a Hawaiian shirt and jeans. Terrible combination, but fashion aside, I'm going to be uncomfortable. I'm not Hawaiian. What are people going to say? What are they going to think? How is it going to feel against my skin? Will it fit right? all kinds of questions just because I'm outside of my comfort zone. And I think the thing about identities is identities are a comfort zone. You get used to your identity. You get used to the way that you see yourself. You get used to the self talk about yourself that informs and reinforces the identity. And the thing about identities is we tend to color everything we experience through our identity and we reinforce it with more data. And then as time goes on, we dig in. That's just who I am. Like, how many times have you said to yourself or somebody else, that's just how I am? That's just who I am. I'm just like that. That's reinforcing an identity. And so I think the fear is real because if you're going to shed yourself of an old identity and adopt something new, well, you don't know what that's going to be like. That's a fact. And I think there's some like interesting evolutionary considerations here too, right? Because if I'm now going to be somebody else, what does that mean to the tribe? Right? Like, how am I going to be perceived? I personally went through this, right? When I went into business and we got some level of success, I felt awkward with my family, not my immediate family so much, but like, parents, siblings, nephews, nieces, like, it's a little bit awkward. Like they knew you as a certain way, and all of a sudden things shifted. And so I think that fear is real and important to call out. You don't know what it's going to be like, and that can be scary.
It can, and I also think some of the fear comes from thinking that you have to jettison too much of your identity, right? That you need to become an entirely different person. And while that is true in some specific areas or, specific approaches, it's worth taking the time to figure out which parts aren't serving you, because this can also feel very overwhelming if you think you need to be an entirely different person. So if we talk about clients or consultants, for example, right, you are coming into your consultancy because you have some expertise, because you're good at what you do, because, a whole bunch of reasons that you're successful. And those things will still be true once you shift the rest of your mindset from, as an example, someone who worked for somebody else to someone who works for yourself. And so I also believe as human beings, because we like to catastrophize and make things harder than they are, that we often make this shift much bigger than it needs to be in our heads. The fear is real. And also, it is really easy to get sucked in by the fear and not then, take a good hard look at what needs to happen to get you where it is that you need to be.
Yeah, it's not like you need to be a fundamentally different person.
No.
Like the way you are with your partner, your kids, your friends, your family, your whatever. Those things don't need to change. If we're talking about professional growth, your professional identity needs to change. I think there are consequences outside of that too, right? But really, what we're talking about is changing your professional identity and how you see the value that you create and the 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 worth of that value. It's how you value your contribution to the market, to clients, to organizations, and the monetary value you place on that transformation. Like those are the things that have to change more than
Yeah.
anything else. You can still be, whatever else you are in your personal life. And
Hawaiian
I think,
shirt guy on Saturday.
well, and I think that the thing that maybe does bleed into that is, if you buy into this concept of how you do one thing is how you do everything, um, there may be disciplinary changes, right? Like maybe
Mhm.
I think you can get away with being, a little bit lax in certain ways and in a corporate environment maybe. And when you run a business and the buck stops with you and there's no safety net and you've got to make the money and bring in the revenue and pay the bills, right? There's an element of discipline and being organized and being focused and decision making, et cetera, that certainly will bleed into other areas of your life. But I take your point. Like, we're not talking about you being a completely different person. We're talking about redefining how you show up to work and your contribution.
Yeah. And, I want to go back to your comment about feeling different around your family, because I do think there is something here as well about if you're trying to make this shift, figuring out the environment that's going to allow you to do that in the best, most effective possible way. So, you think about your family, not in the instance you were talking about, but we all tend to act a certain way around our parents, right? Like you've learned to function in a certain way in that family unit. And it doesn't matter how long you've not lived with them or how old you are when you go back, there's a piece of that that sneaks back in. And I would say that same feeling also carries over into any shift that you're making. So also just recognize that it's going to be really hard to be a different person, to act differently, to take on, a different level of accountability, to take on a different level of strategic thinking if you are still traveling in the same circles, sitting in the same chair, doing all the same things as you were in the space of this previous identity that you're trying to make a shift from. And I say that because I think sometimes we try to rely too much on just muscling through things, right? Just finding a way. It's kind of like the notion of, you want to get healthier. Let's not have 6 bags of chips in my case, or, a big bucket of ice cream in someone else's case in the kitchen. And then just every single day stare at it and try not to eat it. Let's find a way so that you are making it easy for yourself to act in the way that you want to act. Because that really is a lot of what this is, right? Most people have to take on that identity before they really feel comfortable in it. You're going to have to wear that Hawaiian shirt before you feel like a guy who wears Hawaiian shirts.
It's not going to happen, by the way. Not an identity I'm adopting anytime soon. The parents metaphor is a really interesting one, right? Like imagine, I assume that the average listener here is a full grown functioning adult with autonomy and has their own residence and whatever it may be, right? Imagine that you still live with your parents. They still like cooked and cleaned for you, did your laundry, your mom still took care of you. Like you're a kid, you're a child. You could be a grown adult, 40, 50 years old, but you're a child in their house. Tell me that wouldn't have an impact on your life, right? Tell me that's not going to, have consequences to how you show up in the world because the context is such that you're a child, right? And I think to your point, context and environment is so important anytime you're making a shift in identity. And it's not always a shift, right? Like the examples that we gave are significant. As you're going from corporate executive or employee to business owner, entrepreneur, solo consultant, that's a shift in identity. Don't mistake it. It's a shift in identity first and foremost. Going from being a solo to building a team and building an organization, that's a shift in identity. I've done both. I can tell you that it's a big shift, but you're not always shifting. Those, it's not like every year you're becoming somebody new. Those are significant shifts. And if you want to get the results accordingly, you're going to have to consider your environment. If you're a recovering alcoholic, maybe you need friends outside of your old drinking buddies, right? So that's interesting. I mean, I think practically, if I think back to when I was making those shifts, Carrie, there's a lot to go into here, but I think even just little things like the podcasts you listen to, the books you read, the people you hang out with, masterminds, etc. Those went a long way for me at shaping the environment.
Yeah. I mean, I do want to argue with it a little bit. We'll have the fight now, about this notion of you don't always have to make shifts. I think you do. I think they're bigger and smaller. I think the ones you're talking about are more significant, but I also think they don't just happen at once. And so, yes, you're going to be changing more rapidly at times than others. But I would suggest, even if you look back across a period of time where outwardly it might not feel like things have really, really changed, you're still going through this identity shift all the time. And the reason I say that is I think it might be a bit of a relief for someone who thinks that they need to wake up tomorrow and be different than they were yesterday. Recognizing that there are some things that need to change in order for you to walk forward the way you need to walk forward. Yes. And also some of those things happen because you gather the experiences and knowledge and everything that comes with it, the bumps and bruises. The problem comes when you want to just sort of learn it all on the job, right? Like when you want to get there before you'll call yourself the new thing. And we talked about environment, and I would say that it's really important to recognize that there's the external environment, but also the environment you're creating immediately around yourself, right? Like in the inside your brain and in the 2 feet around you, right? Like that space that you control more than any other space. The way that you talk about yourself, the way that you talk to others, the way that you even refer to your business. We talk to so many people who say, well, you know what? I'm trying to become a consultant, right? Well, what does that mean? What does that mean? And what is the event that's going to make you finally say, I am a consultant, right? This is the thing that I do. And so, I think I'm maybe going down a bit of an off ramp here, but the notion of creating the environment for yourself inside yourself is equally as important as the environment that we're talking about that surrounds you, the people, the places, and the conversations that you're having.
That's the real game. I was thinking when you were talking about like, smaller identity shifts that are taking place all the time, you're spot on. I mean, for me, like fitness is a good example.
Mm.
Like I've spent the last few years trying to get into better shape and trying to be, overall healthier in every way from, like cardiovascular fitness, strength, nutrition, etc. And there's little things that I do. Like, for example, I tend to follow a lot of fitness people on Instagram.
Mm.
It's a little like really subtle change to environment. So a lot of my feed is fitness gurus and nutrition experts talking about this supplement and that type of exercise and this blah 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 blah, right? Like I just consume more of this information now, which is reinforcing my identity. But to your point, I think the real transformation takes place between your ears.
Mm.
And I'm reminded of Dr. Maxwell Maltz's psychocybernetics. He's got this concept of the theater of the mind, which is basically visualization. And I think it's so interesting. People neglect this. You, the human imagination is wildly powerful, and you can imagine yourself to be whatever you want. There's no limit to that, right? And you can construct a narrative in your head, and you can be that person. You can get those results, and you can have those experiences, and you have full control over that. And if you've done this, you could probably testify that doing that theater of the mind work, that visualization work, that being the person that you want to be in your head first and foremost, has a really interesting way of tangibly showing up in the world the more you do it. And so I think it's, I kind of think of it as like practice, right? For a professional athlete, nobody shows up on game day without having done any practice. They do practice first, they make their mistakes, they refine their skills, and they show up to the games ready. Well, if real life is the game, practice can be in your head.
Mm.
That too woo.
I don't think so. I don't think so. But, at the root of all this is really the question and the self-examination around where are you holding yourself back? And it's an easy question to ask. It's a tougher question to answer. But if you look at the areas where you wish you're moving forward, more quickly or more effectively, my guess would be that there's very little outside of you that's stopping you from doing that. You just need to figure out how to connect the dots to understand what identity you have not yet taken on.
Yeah, good question to ask in that regard. And this is something I've come back to a lot in my journey is, are there people out there getting the results that I want? The answer is invariably yes,
Mhm.
there are. And if so, the second question, if you're not getting those results, is what's the difference between them and me?
Yeah. And what's interesting is that the question is, what is the difference between who they are and who I am? we tend to go to the question, what's the difference between what they're doing, right? Like, what's the tactic that they've taken on?
Yeah.
And that might be useful research, but the thing that's really going to get you there is understanding who they are versus who you are.
I'll give you an example of this. I saw a video recently about the guy was telling a story about Phil Knight from Nike and how Phil Knight would I don't even know the story, right? Phil Knight was like there was some really like existential moment in the business of Nike, and he could have easily just given up and thrown it all away, but he found a way to persist and he moved forward, and then Nike became the giant brand that it's become, and it's from the book Shoe Dog. It's Phil Knight's memoir. I promptly bought the book, right? Because I want to know what he's got. Like the guy that built Nike, right? And I assumed it wasn't all like, the graph didn't go up and to the right from the beginning. Like any great story has its fair share of failures and mistakes. And I want to know, like, what did he do in those moments? How was he thinking? What was his mindset? How did he approach it? That's the difference. I'm not going to adopt Nike's marketing strategy anytime soon, but I want to adopt Phil Knight's mindset.
Yeah, or what's also interesting is you may not decide to adopt all of Phil Knight's mindset, but exposing yourself to different people, right? Different approaches, because there is no one way, also helps you get to a place where you understand, okay, this is who I actually am, right? I've tried these on, I've tested them. This one worked, this one didn't work. These are the ones I'm keeping, and this is how I'm going to move forward, as my best self.